Hello, and welcome to today's webinar in Knowledge Miles, the 695th Lord Mayor's Lectures. In this series, online series, we address the connections in and around the square mile, what Michael Manielli, who's the current Lord Mayor, calls the world's coffee house, and how those connections might help us tackle future global challenges. Today we've got a wonderful lecture in store, How Pollinator-Friendly is the City of London? Always good to have a question mark in the title. And the answer is will be forthcoming, I hope. My name's Richard Harvey. I'm a professor of computer science at the University of East Anglia, and I'm the convener for this session, which means I shall be getting out of your way fairly quickly, but then I shall pop up and deal with the Q&A. A little bit of housekeeping from me. The agenda slide will be popping up on your screen in just a moment, and that's how we're going to run today. As usual, we're in the City of London, so we tend to run fairly swiftly, and usually the audience are very good at posting questions and commentary very quickly into the question and Q&A session, which I appreciate very much. Now, today's speakers, we have two. We have Dr. Heather Barrett-Mold, OBE, who is Vice Chair of the charity Pollinating London Together. She is past master of the Gardeners Livery Company, and I think she's also a founder member of the Livery Climate Action Group. And then I could read on for quite a few more sort of hours about her distinguished career. If you'd like to know more about her, then please do have a look at the Gresham Society website, which has got all of the background information for all of the lectures in this series. Second speaker is Dr. Konstantinos Tsiolis, who is a pollinator ecologist. And he's a new PhD, I think. He's just finished his PhD at the University of Reading. And since the spring of 22, he's been working for Pollinating London Together. That's enough from me. Now, speakers, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So yes, as Richard has said, I'm Heather Barrett-Mold, and I'm going to start the presentation and then hand over to Konstantinos. So why Pollinating London Together? Well, it started out with two livery companies working together and recognising the significant decline in insects and looking at what we could do about this. Over the past 20 years, there have been something like a 60% decline in flying insects. And so the gardeners and the Chandlers got together and started this initiative. That was back in 2020. In fact, we started it in February 20, just before the lockdown in March 20, but that didn't stop us. And now we've got over 50 livery companies in this pan livery initiative, and various other corporates as well, a number of different members. So we're conscious that the global economy is so dependent on nature and natural resources, and that hasn't really been understood so well. It's better now. Green spaces are really important for climate change, biodiversity and well-being, and also pollinators are needed for something like a third of all of our food. So we started out working within the City of London, where there's something like 32 hectares of green space. You might not think that. And so we started looking at pollinator-friendly planting, trying to advise on how we could make our green spaces better for that. And then, as you've heard, Konstantinos joined us, and Konstantinos is a pollinator expert. And so he was able to do some surveying of actual pollinators to give us a baseline to go with what we thought was going on by looking at the pollinator-friendly planting. So what are pollinators? Very often when you talk about pollinators, people immediately think of honeybees. Actually, pollinators there are something like 250 different species of bees, through the UK. The honeybee is only one, and the honeybee is farmed, and actually it is in competition with some of the other bees for forage and out in our green spaces. But also hoverflies, moths, butterflies, beetles. There are so many different pollinators out there. So the objectives of PLT were to just raise awareness, to redress the decline in pollinators in urban environments, and to inform and encourage companies and other organisations to make some meaningful decisions to help make that happen. And I have to say, there has been such a will to support this initiative. People are so keen to help and to do the right thing in order to help our pollinators. So it is really quite an easy sell. So I think I've run through some of the Pollinating London Together background in when it started, who the different companies were, who then joined us. But what have we done so far? So as I said, we started out in 2020, we set up the website, and we started doing surveys of pollinator-friendly planting at that time. But since Konstantinos joined us and we could actually survey the pollinators as well, in 22 and 23 we surveyed over 60 sites. We've promoted citizen science, we raised awareness, we've done lots of different work, and we've worked in education and helped with training people as well. So I'll just show you a few slides of some of the sites that we've looked at. With these different green spaces, they nearly all, like all green spaces, have their own specific difficulties. So although people are very willing, the green space managers are very willing to make these more pollinator friendly, because they have different uses as well, sometimes that's quite difficult for them. So the picture on the left here is the roof garden, which is on top of Cannon Street Station. It's a really lovely garden. The soil depth is 20 centimetres. So the difficulty here is just managing that with 20 centimetres. The garden on the right-hand side is the garden that's alongside Barber Surgeons Hall, and it's a physic garden and does very well, is relatively small. On the next slide, we've got a view of plasterers and also a green wall. Now, green walls and green roofs can vary, but this particular green wall is lovely. It's really floristic, and so is a really good source for pollinators. The one on the left, the plasterers one, of course, has aspects of London Wall there, so that comes with its own difficulties. On the next slide, we've got Inner Temple, and then we've got the moat of the Tower of London, and you'll have seen the work that's been done in the moat. The next slide has got the garden at Merchant Taylor's on the left. Actually, both of these pictures are Merchant Taylor's. The difficulty with this garden is that even in the height of summer, about a quarter of it is always shaded by those really tall buildings that surround Merchant Taylor's. And the next slide is the roof garden, which is right on the very top of Nomura. It's up there with all the infrastructure, all the cooling for the computer system, but they do so well to provide different habitats for different sorts of pollinators. So in the time that we've been working, we've been advantaged by having a grant from the City of London Community Infrastructure Levy Neighbourhood Fund, which has enabled us to employ Konstantinos, as you'll see. And that's meant that we can actually work more closely with all sorts of green space managers. And we work very closely with the City of London. City of London City Gardens team and environmental resilience team, and the City Gardens team are trying to put in place different trees which are pollinator friendly, like resistant elms. So there's a move to put in place resistant elms through the disease-resistant elms through the City of London. So this slide shows Konstantinos out there doing some of the survey with a colleague of his from Reading University. We've been so fortunate to agree a memorandum of understanding with Reading University, and it's given us access to all sorts of different resources and advice. And so at this point, I'll hand over to Konstantinos.
Thank you very much, Heather. So I was introduced previously. My name is Konstantinos Tsiolis, and I'm a pollinator ecologist. We have been able to map the green spaces in the City of London using GIS and the Giggle system. And we included layers to indicate pollinator presence and quality of sites. And through this, we were able to identify a network of good habitats. So alongside with the City of London Corporation, we came together to design biodiversity corridors. And you can see the map on the right. You can see in green the biodiversity corridors of the City of London. Each one on the south along the river, each one on the north east, and then one from south to north through St. Paul's. So in 2023, our surveys were planned to be mostly along these biodiversity corridors. However, we wanted to look into biodiversity networks. So we had several sites within the corridors to ensure that pollinators will have enough green spaces to fly around and have food resources and nesting resources. So something to bear in mind is that many of the bees that we record in the City of London are very small, about to 3-4 millimeters long. And what we know is that the size of the bee is highly relevant to how far it can fly from nesting site. So the bigger the bee, the further it can fly. So having food and nesting resources within close proximity is very essential for many bees and other pollinators. But what we found, especially small bees that we recorded in the City of London, and we will come back to that very shortly. So Heather have mentioned already about the high proportion of honeybees in the City of London compared to other urban areas. And I will show you a graph to demonstrate demonstrate the abundance of honeybees in the City of London compared to other pollinators. So this is just a map to show the sites we have surveyed in 2022 and 23, which you can see them marked in red. And then the sites marked in yellow were surveyed only in 2023. And then we have 5 sites marked with green markers, which are the roof gardens surveyed only in 2023. So PLT is a member of DEFRA Pollinator Action Strategy Group. We also take part in Bees Needs Week, which is a DEFRA event aimed to increase awareness of bees needs. And in 2022, we have a collaborative event with University of Reading, and we're planning to have another one this year. Most likely it's going to be in Kew Gardens. So PLT is a member of the HRP Mode Advisory Group for the Tower of London. And we also provide several trainings and educational events in corporations, schools, and other organizations, just to increase awareness of the importance of pollinators and the importance of diversity of pollinators in urban areas. Here are some photos from one of the one or more school visits. young people are very interested to understand and hear about pollinators, which is quite heartwarming, really. In my experience, you only need to give half a chance to a young person, and then you can grab their attention very easily. And what we do in some cases, we just give them a net, get out in a green space, and then they are able to catch themselves some pollinators and have a close look of specific pollinators to understand the structure of the insect, and then we provide the necessary information, of course. It's just fascinating. This is some photos from the Livery School Link Showcase that we participated last year, and we also participate this year as well. Again, just to increase awareness of the importance of pollinators and diversity of pollinators. So now pollinator surveys in 2023. We have surveyed overall 63 sites, and we did 4 rounds of surveying: early spring, late spring, early summer, and late summer. So the sites we have surveyed were mainly public gardens, which City of London gardens, some private gardens, and also we had 5 roof gardens. Overall, 9,606 pollinating insects were recorded. So what we found, so on this pie chart, you can see all the different pollinator groups we recorded in the City of London. And as you can see, out of all pollinators recorded, 57% were honeybees. And someone might say, why is this important? It is important because when we look into the literature, we realize that the usual percentage of honeybees in urban areas are approximate 7 to 8%. The fact that we have 57% of honeybees in the City of London, this is very highly likely to have issues in terms of competition in food resources with other wild pollinators, such as solitary bees, bumblebees, wasps, hoverflies, and so on. So honeybees are good, but we need diversity. We need a bit of everything. We cannot have just a very high percentage of one type of pollinators and a lot less of others. We need a nice balance, really. In UK, we have 270 bee species, and the fact that we recorded such a high percentage of honeybees, it is alarming. So, as we said, 57% of honeybees, 9% of solitary bees, 16% were bumblebees, and then the rest of the pollinator groups in lower percentages. So now what we found on roof gardens. It is important to mention that roof gardens were only 8% of the sites that we were surveyed. However, we found 21% of total samples recorded on roof gardens. So 1/5 of the pollinating insects recorded were found on roof gardens. And this is just to demonstrate how important roof gardens can be in providing the right habitat and supporting pollinators if we provide suitable food and nesting resources. Again, the percentage of honeybees on roof gardens was very high, and this is possibly because many of the honeybee hives are on rooftops. So if there is a food resource in a nearby roof garden, most likely honeybees will prefer that instead of getting to ground level to search for food resource. So we found 5% of pollinators recorded were solitary bees and 15% bumblebees. So for me and others, this was fascinating, really, because if you bear in mind that some of these solitary bees, for example, are very small, we had this question in terms of, are these bees going to be able to get in those roof gardens, considering the height? Just an example, the garden at 120, for example, which was one of the roof gardens we have surveyed, it was on top of a 15-story building. So it just shows that if you provide the right resources, pollinators will find a way to get there and take advantage of them. And I think roof gardens can be very beneficial in urban areas such as the City of London in terms of supporting those biodiversity networks and pollinator networks in an urban area. So another question we wanted to answer is whether higher plant diversity, flower diversity, reflects to a higher pollinator diversity. And what you can see on the graph is a very nice positive correlation between the two. And the answer is yes. If we provide higher plant genera diversity and flower diversity, we end up with a higher diversity of pollinators. So diversity is key, really. Now, plans for pollinators. So pollinators were recorded on 72% of flowering plants found in the City of London. And then we decided to give awards to the best plants. And as you can see, gold award to Salvia, a silver to Rudbeckia, and bronze to Nepeta. And this was based on the number of visits. However, it's very important to highlight that this list of plants is only based on what already exists in the City of London. It's not necessarily the best plants for pollinators in general. So when we seek for advice for the best plants for pollinators, we need to look into very well research studies from several sites which provide analysis of reward in terms of nectar, the quality of nectar, the sugar levels, and so on. So we need very well researched studies to come up with the best plants for pollinators, and there are many lists available online. However, in our website, we have, in our resources section of our website, we have a nice list of plants for urban areas as well. So feel free to have a look and get some ideas of what you can plant in your garden for pollinators. So now, bee nesting. 98% of the bee species recorded were cavity nesters. And I found many of them nesting in cracks of old buildings. As you can see on the first picture on the right, it's an example of a crack in a stone wall where I saw those very small solitary bees, which is the genus Hylaeus, or their common name are yellow-faced bees. They have these very beautiful yellow kind of markers on their face. It's like a mask, really. And I saw them getting through those cracks in and out. I also found bees nesting in brick walls, again, cracks of brick walls or holes. And also cavity nesting bees can nest in the stems of hollow plants. So the fact that we have such a high percentage of cavity nesting bees in the City of London, it seems that these species have adapted in urban areas like the City of London, with many natural cavities on the walls. Also the Roman walls is a very useful nesting resource for these bees. And it's very important to highlight that these cavity nesting bees, they are not destroying walls. What they simply do is taking advantage of existing cavities. They might shape them a little bit, but they don't remove very big amount of building materials, so to worry about potential damage. Then 2% of the bee species recorded were ground nesters. And this is extremely important to focus on if we consider that 70% of approximately 270 bee species are actually ground nesters. And during my surveys, what I can certainly say is that one of the big limitations of the City of London is available nesting resources for these ground nesting bees. So most ground nesting bee species, they prefer bare ground with as much sunlight exposure as possible, especially in the morning, because they need to get out as early as possible to do their business. However, in the City of London, considering how shaded many of the gardens are, the nesting resources are very limited. So we are working with private gardeners and City of London gardeners to identify potential locations to provide those suitable nesting resources in the future. So a fascinating story was an Amphidium manicatum, which is a solitary bee you can see on the bottom right. So I was having my lunch really on one of the wooden benches in the near St. Paul's, and then all of a sudden I could see this bee, which I know very well, try to get into the bench, and I was wondering why is it trying to get into the bench? And I'm always curious, so to understand why. So I just had a look under the arm of the bench, and I could see this solitary bee nesting in a small cavity inside the wooden arm of the bench. So it's just fascinating. It just shows you how opportunistic these bees can be in some cases, especially when we have such a limited nesting resources in urban areas. So this is just a very brief information on the life cycle. If we start from the top left, we can see that so this is a life cycle for cavity nesting bees and ground nesting bees, so wild bees, which is very different to honeybees. So most of these bees, they don't live in a social structure. Most of them are solitary. So what you have is inside the nest, for example, in a cavity, in a hollow stem. Many of you might be familiar with bee hotels, for example, which is an example of a cavity nesting habitat. And then you have the males emerging first. About 1-2 weeks later, the females emerge, and then they mate, and is what you can see on number 2. Then the males die off. The males are just for mating. Then the females are responsible to find suitable nesting habitat, like a hollow plant stem. They provide enough food resource inside the stem, which you can see on number 4. Once they provide enough food resource, they will lay an egg on top of the food resource. So, and then they will close the cell. They will create another and another and another cell straight after. So the egg will hatch, will become a larvae. It will feed on the provided food resource by the mother, and then it will become an adult inside the cocoon, and then they will hibernate during fall and winter. And then when the appropriate weather conditions are present, they will emerge again and continue the life cycle. If it's spring species, they will emerge in spring, of course. If it's summer species, in summer. The same is true with ground nesting bees. They have a very similar, identical really, nesting behavior in terms of the life cycle. However, everything happens in the soil instead of a cavity. So, PLT in 2024 and beyond. So we decided to reduce the number of sites and increase the frequency of visits, just to try to capture more
Konstantinos,
accurately
Konstantinos,
the
it's Richard. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm just watching the time and I can see some questions coming in. So I do want to sort of encourage you to wrap up because we need
okay.
to pick up those questions. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, 20 seconds, more or less.
Yeah, go for it. Just
Yeah,
bring us
okay,
to a
perfect.
nice,
Thank you.
bring us to a nice civilized conclusion. Perfect. Yeah.
I will do. Thank you very much. So we want to increase the research focus on roof gardens, which, as we said, can provide excellent habitat for pollinators, and increase the focus on nesting resources for cavity and ground nesting bees. We want to increase our work on moths. We recorded day-flying moths. However, now we want to record also night flight moths. And then we want to, we are in the process of getting approved a well-being survey to help us understand whether green spaces and pollinators influence human well-being. And we are continuously working on building long-term relationships with specific schools. To sum up, research like University of Reading was recently involved has highlighted that pollinator diversity is very important for interannual stability in pollinator communities. With climate change, we know that some species might do better than others. Some might go extinct. So having a diversity is key, just to ensure the sustainability of pollination services into the future. So pollinator diversity in the City of London and many other urban areas can be enhanced by increasing the pollinator-friendly planting and improving nesting resources across the city. So coming back to the main question of the presentations, how pollinator-friendly is the City of London? The City of London, it is pollinator-friendly, but there is a lot more work that can be done to ensure that we have even more pollinator-friendly city into the future and sustainability of pollination services. So thank you very much, and we are more than happy to answer any questions you might have.
Great, amazing. I mean, it's always amazing listening to people working in the City of London. You know, huge, very impressive effort on what is actually a tiny area, isn't it? 32 hectares. I was trying to calculate. I was trying to put it in a sort of context. It's really, very, very impressive to hear. Now, I've got quite a load of questions, as you might expect. The first one is just an informational one. Me and some others wondered, the roof garden, was that Cannon Bridge roof garden that you showed right at the beginning?
So yes, so on the first photograph, it's Cannon Bridge roof garden. It's not publicly open, but yes, that's the one with the sort of 20 centimetre soil depth.
Perfect. Okay, and Faye Thompson Ireland asks, what's the percentage of honeybees in the UK normally, i.e. not the City of London? So if you just, I wondered this as well, how representative is the City of London compared to the sort of, we all know that there's a sort of pollinator problem in the UK. Could you talk a little bit about that?
I'll start because I'll just give Konstantinos a bit of a rest. But it's way out. So we work with a number of different people from different universities, and one of them is Catherine Baldock from Northumbria University, and she has done work on urban situations, and she will tell us that you would normally expect to get somewhere between 7 and 8% honeybees in an urban situation. And of course, we're getting far more than that. And I think to some extent it's been because back in the day, people thought that having honeybee hives was a good thing to do, and it was a green tick, in the whole looking at how sustainable is your business. More recently, I think we understand that what honeybees are doing is, I mean, they're not native to the UK, not the honeybees that you find in beehives here. and they compete for the forage. So the amount is way out. And I think in planning legislation now, to have a beehive would not be considered to be a good thing, but previously it was. And also people try to do the right thing and they don't really realise. So, you know, for all the right reasons, people are putting in beehives and keeping honeybees, but actually it is a problem. And sometimes they're not always looked after as well as they might be. And then they're capable of spreading diseases through the other native bees.
Right. So yeah, I was wondering this. So planning does require all sorts of interventions, doesn't it? So slapping up a few honey hives, not such a good idea.
No.
Now, Matthew Leach asks, do people have honeybee hives in the City of London for serious honey farming, or is it just pollinators? Do you know what the motivation? I mean, you sort of implied, Heather, there that they didn't really know why they had them in the first place, but
yeah. So some of them definitely use it to keep honey, and some of them will produce honey and give honey to some of their clients with a nice label on it, and it's, you know, on the surface of it, it's a nice thing to do, isn't it?
yeah, sounds
But
great.
actually,
I'm longing for the Worshipful Company of Information Technologists honey. I mean, I'm going to ask for it now.
yeah. So I mean, you can understand why people do this, but our message would constantly be, you know, please don't, not in these heavily urban areas. There's a carrying capacity for honeybees before they really, you know, have that adverse impact on the rest of the native bees.
I think it's very important to add, Richard, that the London Beekeepers Association actually agrees with us that we have too many honeybees in the City of London, and actually the honeybees are struggling themselves because there is not enough food resource even for them. So if there is not enough food resource for them, imagine how much food resource we have available for the rest of pollinators. And as Heather said, people have the best intentions usually, and many people, they just don't know the diversity of bees. They just think by having a honeybee hive, they are helping the bees. And so as Pollinating London Together, we want to increase that awareness. We have so many, as we said, so many other bee species and other pollinators that everybody deserves a space. And what I usually say, which usually stays in people's mind, is having honeybees to help the bees is like having chickens in your back garden to help the bird population.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's a type of farming, really.
And so here's a sort of more delicate question, which is, I mean, I imagine some people are rather nervous about certain types of pollinators because they sting people. And that's not just unpleasant, but for some people it's very serious, obviously. Is there any sort of solution to that? I mean, presumably there is some covert, what's the word, bee genocide going on because people get rid of nasty, buzzy, stingy insects. Have you?
And so generally speaking, this would be happening if the bees concerned had something to defend. So they want to defend their young, or they want to defend their food source. So actually, the ones that really have got something to defend are the honeybees,
right?
And not the others. And so, although some of the others can sting, it's not particularly common, and it's a lot more minor, I would say. Do you think, Konstantinos?
Absolutely, absolutely. I was just gonna say that the solution is having more wild bees, really, instead of honeybees, which, as Heather said, they have to defend their honey. So honeybees, they live all year round. So they need to store as much honey as possible to be able to survive in the winter where there is no other food resource. However, solitary bees, they live about 5 to 6 weeks, and they only collect a very tiny amount of food resource for their young. So they have nothing to defend, and they don't sting. I mean, many people they consider them stingless, which is not true really. They have a sting, but it's very small, and they don't sting because simply they have nothing to defend.
I see. So Neville McNally just has a point of information which I didn't know. He said there are native honeybees, even if they may be hybrid imported honeybees in the City of London. I assume that's correct, is it, Konstantinos? That not all honeybees are imported.
Yes, I'm aware of some native honeybees. However, what we're saying is that just let's don't bring more and more honeybees in the City of London, and if we can, to reduce as much as possible the abundance of honeybees. Really, as I said in my presentation, honeybees have a place. However, they have as much place as every other pollinator.
Gotcha. Yeah. And Faye Thompson Ireland says, what plant stems are used by cavity bees? Should the dead plants be left in situ and not cut down to avoid removing bee larvae?
Absolutely, that's a very good question. So there are so many different plants that can be used by bees for nesting. Any hollow stem plant, literally, it can be used if it's at the right place, which is mostly at the place which receive as much sunlight exposure as possible. Sunlight and temperature is very important for the reproductive stages of bees and many other insects. So we advise that if you have any plants with hollow stems, you can simply cut them and just store them in a nice sunny location, or you can set up a bee hotel, which many of you might be familiar, which are usually made by bamboo, hollow bamboo stems, which can be used by cavity nesting bees for nesting.
It's probably worth, isn't it, saying, Konstantinos, that actually if you are going to devise your own bee hotel or a collection of stems, it's worth just making sure that they're at least 15 centimetres long, because as Konstantinos was explaining, as the bees produce their eggs and the larvae, the ones down the far end of the tube are female, and the ones at the surface are male. So if that tube is not long enough, then you'll get a predominance of one sex.
Yeah, so very important. Keep the stems at least 15. Yeah,
and that sort of segues into a nice final question actually from Clive Bullen, who says, "Is there anything we can do in our ordinary day-to-day lives to help pollination and/or protect?" Well, he says bees, but should we say protect pollinators? now being corrected by your presentation. So just to sort of, have you got any observations? Now let's think about that from two perspectives, perhaps. Perspectives of individuals, those of us living at home, not always living in London, and then as workers, what can we do to lobby our employers? Well, people on the call might well be employers. What can we do as workers in the City of London?
So I think it's really useful to make sure that, as Konstantinos was saying, you have as much diversity of flowering as possible, and that diversity of flowering, if possible, can run from February through to October, because there is a dependence on the nectar and the pollen over that period of time. So it's very easy to have everything flowering in May. But actually it's a bit more difficult to get enough things flowering through February through to October. So that's really worthwhile doing. It's really worthwhile having bee hotels, perhaps sited at least, at about a metre or a metre and a half high, and as Konstantinos was saying, in a fairly sunny spot. So bee hotels need to be sited in that way. And if possible, to leave some areas undisturbed, because that helps with nesting.
Brilliant. Well, wonderful suggestions. Time has, I thought it might do, has run away from us. It always does on these lectures when the speakers are interesting and the topic is on point, as they say. So we need to stop. Just a brief look at some of the forthcoming lectures in the series. which are popping up on screen now. I do commend all of those to you. I shall be in charge of some of them, but not others. First thanks are to you, the audience, which as usual were engaged and interesting and full of opinions and good things. We're always grateful for that. That makes it really good for both of us. But most of all, thanks to our two speakers. I thought that was a really interesting lecture. If you want to catch up, then this lecture and all our lectures actually are posted on our YouTube channel if you want to revisit it. And if you need further information, do look at the Gresham Society website. If you like this sort of thing, then I recommend Gresham College to you, which is one of the jewels of the City of London, online or live lectures. Other than that, thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.